boring people. They preferred to conclude cooperative agreements, and when the going got tough, they then packed up and moved camp, in this case to Carthage.
A sturdy fortress rises above the Tunisian coast. Phoenician builders fortified it strongly enough to serve its purpose for 2,000 years. Kekouan was an ancient drawing board city. To this day, its geometric layout can still be made out. It's protected by a sturdy ring of walls, Greek-style city planning. Cleverly, the Phoenicians adopted from others whatever they thought might be useful to them. Their advanced architecture can also be admired on the Sicilian island of Motya. The ancient harbour still exists today. Here, ships sought shelter from storms and unloaded on the quay aromatic oils and incense from Arabia, silk and spices from India, gold and ivory from Africa. The harbour took part in the international trade of exotic goods. Polybius studies with amazement the inventiveness with which the Carthaginians designed their former colonial cities. Even after its destruction, one can still see how well the place was protected against attack for centuries. Here, a heavy gate secured the entrance to Motya. Before the Romans, the Greeks were their greatest rivals, but as artists, they were nevertheless a welcome sight on the streets of Motya. This figure of a young man is still admired as a masterpiece today. The wealthy sea traders commissioned it from a Greek sculptor, but the particular manner in which the robe is folded proudly declares, "This is a Phoenician." The foreign outpost did not content itself with its riches. Successful agricultural methods and technical innovations were introduced to Europe from the Orient. The salt works on the coast of Sicily also have their origin in this time. To this day, salt is reclaimed here. Long trade voyages would not have been possible without this preservative for fish and meat. A seafaring people needed salt. The network of Phoenician bases is more closely linked every year. The fleet has constantly expanded. Trade ventures become ever more ambitious. Far off to the west, they are lured by the legendary ore deposits of Tartessos. The Rio Tinto mine is the largest manually excavated hole in Spain. 3,000 years ago, the Phoenicians started to mine silver and copper here. They not only took the resources, they also left behind traces of their advanced civilization. These can still be found today on the island of Ibiza. Tucked away in a vast pine forest is a barely accessible cave. Here the Phoenicians set up a shrine to their goddess, Tanit, and to this day we can still sense the mystery of divine apparition when at high noon beams of light suddenly penetrate into this underworld. We can only guess what sort of rituals were carried out in this dimly lit cave. In stone niches and sacrificial pits, researchers found small statues of gods and cult objects. Countless generations of believers made their pilgrimages here, continuing into modern times. On Ibiza, long after the destruction of Carthage, the Phoenician goddess continues to be worshipped and petitioned. But the citizens of Rome do not understand this kind of divinity with its contradictory persona. To the Carthaginians, Tanit was both mother goddess and hetaira. Rome's consecrated virgins would have blushed at such an idea. They served their gods through chastity. Tanit's priests, however, promoted prostitution in the temple and pocketed the wages of love. Not only in this remote religious cave is the island's Phoenician heritage evident. Ibiza is linked as if with an umbilical cord to the history of the Orient. Here too, extensive salt works give evidence of the ancient city. On the fortress mount, the ancient foundation walls have been built over, but the rock has been hollowed out to form ancient burial chambers.
The name Ibiza is derived from Ivoshim. This is what the Carthaginians called our island when they settled here. The name means island of the god Bes and was used to refer to Ibiza and Formentera. Why was it named after the god Bes? Because there were no poisonous animals on Ibiza, no spiders, snakes, or scorpions. This led the Phoenicians to believe that it was protected by the god Bes.
This singing has rung strange in the ears of many an ethnologist. It sounds like it's from another time and place. It's said to be Phoenician singing. These are reportedly the last two people to master this special singing technique used for traditional shepherd songs. Their death will mark the end of a long cultural heritage on this island, extending back as far as 2,500 years. The wedding jewelry of this farm girl has also been passed down through the generations. In Iberian princes' tombs, similar jewelry has been found, made by Phoenician craftsmen. The evidence becomes even more compelling following the excavation of an ancient oil press. The wild olive trees on the island were improved by the Phoenicians through grafting. Oil lamps and domesticated donkeys were also brought to Spain by the Phoenicians. Today, millstones are still used to press the oil, so precious in ancient times. The milling technique introduced then is still used today. In the ruins of the estate, this rough-hewn block of stone was found, a counterweight. Today's mills work along the same principles as thousands of years ago. The use of engines would speed up the pressing process, but the quality of the oil could not be improved. Ibiza's folk dances are also reminiscent of the faraway land of Canaan and Carthage. The female dancers circle ceaselessly around their male partners, like the moon around the sun. A symbolic temple round dance to honor the moon goddess Astarte and the sun god Baal, it said. Does this evidence allow us to draw an astonishing conclusion? Did the Phoenicians know that the planets revolved around the sun? Scientific evidence points to a close genetic link between Ibiza's farmers and today's Palestinians. This conclusion is the result of research done at the University of the Balearic Islands. It would no longer be misleading to speak of Phoenician blood coursing in the veins of the Ibethincos. Legend even places the birthplace of the Carthaginian army general Hannibal right here on this outcropping on the Ibiza coast. The Vedra acted as a navigational landmark for Phoenicians sailing along the Iberian coast. Far off to the west, their travels took them to secret, unspoken destinations. Nobody was to know where the source of the Phoenicians' wealth lay. On the other side of the strait between Spain and Morocco lies the ocean. In 480 BC, Carthage blocks passage to all enemy ships. This is the starting point of the dangerous route to Britain, the home of tin, and to the fabulous islands in the ocean. The Phoenicians called today's Strait of Gibraltar the Pillars of Melkart. On both sides of the strait stood the temples to the god of the city of Tyre, a thorn in the side of all rivals. Polybius found confirmation of this in the Roman Senate's records. Rome's hatred towards Carthage began to develop at that time. But who cared about all that in Gades, today's Cadiz? The Phoenician city was flourishing. Worship of the gods determined everyday life. In Melkart's temple, a young priest is being initiated. The shrine was known in the Old World for its beauty and wealth, as well as for its oracle. The ritual knife is being used to cut the young acolyte's hair, not his throat. He will use the knife himself later, during the sacrificial rites, when it's time to satisfy the god's thirst for blood. The chronicler Polybius had already heard reports in Rome about the religious rites of the Phoenicians. His countrymen are disgusted by these cult rituals. They consider them to be barbaric. In the Bible, too, they are harshly condemned. Blood is the most important sacrificial offering, but other parts of the body are also offered to the gods, even the hair of the newly initiated priest. In the temples of the goddesses Astarte and Tanit, priestesses practice holy prostitution. Herodotus writes that in Babylon and on Cyprus, all women must undergo this ritual at least once in their lives, waiting in the goddess's shrine until a stranger comes to engage their services, leaving behind an appropriate payment in the temple's coffers. "80 years after the fall of Troy, this is where the city of Cadiz in southern Spain is thought to have been founded by seafarers from Tyre. It lies well protected on an island in the most remote corner of the globe. This is how it's described by Roman historians. A clever settlement strategy, because this meant that the Phoenicians now controlled both ends of the Mediterranean. Gades became the operation base for increasingly daring expeditions. 2,000 years later, Portuguese seafarers board their caravels in Lisbon. In 1497, Captain Vasco da Gama has decided it's time to discover a sea route to India. Da Gama has closely studied a papyrus text of Herodotus, who writes that Phoenicians sailed around Africa in the 7th century BC. The Portuguese want to repeat the feat. For the first time in 2,000 years, ships once again take to the seas on a course for the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. On their way down the Moroccan coast, the Portuguese establish highly fortified bases. Mogador is one of these. Since the end of French colonial rule, this harbour town has been known as Essaouira, but the traces of the past are unmistakable. Heavy bronze cannons and fortress walls several meters thick were meant to keep the marauding Berber tribes in check. Mogador was a trading center and a military base. The Phoenicians preferred the natural defenses of an island. They established their settlement within sight of the coast. They were in Mogador for a particular reason: fishing. They followed the vast schools of tuna, which migrated regularly from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. In Andalusia, fishermen still set out once a year in search of the prized tuna. They fish just as the Phoenicians did. The fish are lured into a large square of nets and surrounded. Then the boats draw closer and closer together. There's no escape for the tuna. But such large catches were a problem in the ancient world, especially for those in the warm south. How could they preserve the easily perishable meat so it could be transported to their customers far away? On the Atlantic coast, ancient fish factories have been discovered. The Phoenicians developed the method of preserving fish in large stone tanks and then processing it to make the delicacy known as garum to the Romans, a heavily salted fish puree, which, once it was filled into amphora, was transported as far afield as Persia and Germania. Around 500 BC, Hanno, a Phoenician seafarer, led a large fleet southwards from Morocco. 60 ships with 50 oars each. This can be read by the chronicler in the preserved ship's log. It tells of eerie bushfires and wild ape-men. Phoenicians apparently did not know the meaning of fear. They oriented themselves using the position of the sun and the stars. We don't know if they used instruments such as the sextant or compass, but like the Portuguese, they kept precise details of their sea routes and discoveries a secret. Hanno's voyage was a fantastic adventure which was met with astonishment and disbelief by his contemporaries. Past endless river deltas and violent volcanic eruptions, the ships pressed on to the south. The peoples of the ancient world considered the ocean to be the realm of sea monsters. But the Phoenicians knew better. Did they even discover America 2,000 years before Columbus? Between the two continents lies the archipelago of the Azores in the Atlantic. The remote island of Corfu is a steep volcanic cone with a deceptively peaceful-looking crater. The sheer cliffs are said to have once borne a large statue with its arms stretched westward. This was reported by the first Portuguese sailors to discover the island. Ever since, Corfu has been combed for ancient temple remains. The search has concentrated on the narrow inhabited coastal strip. An English professor has found old pottery fragments here, of Carthaginian origin, he believes. In the harbour basin of Corfu, divers look for an ancient Astarte shrine which may have fallen into the sea during an earthquake, but they are hindered in their search by a hazardous undertow. In the waters off the coast of the island of Terceira, however, Portuguese marine archaeologists made a spectacular discovery. The Bay of Angra is a huge ship's graveyard with wrecks from many different periods. The difficulty confronted by divers here is determining how long ago the ship sank. But they are convinced this find is something special. The well-preserved wooden planks of this wreck appear to point to a more recent date, but appearances are deceiving. The sunken ship was buried for a long time under a layer of sand several meters thick. Its presence was only revealed by a severe storm. The divers are under pressure because a new storm is brewing. It's worth all the effort. The design of the ship indicates that it's very old indeed. A find from the Phoenician era would be a sensation, the long-sought proof of the legend